Hello everybody, I'm Roy McCoy and welcome to the latest episode of my series, What Happened To, where we take a game and or series that has seemingly disappeared and ask those all-important questions. What was it? What happened to it? And could we ever see it again? Before we get started, don't forget to like this video because it really helps me, and subscribe if you do love RPG-focused videos. This episode will be focusing on arguably one of the greatest game series ever made, and certainly one of my favourite games, Knights of the Old Republic and its sequel. There was also a multiplayer game much later on, and I will be talking very briefly about that, but this video will be focusing more on those two solo games. At this point, I'm going to lead this video with a very bold statement and say that if you have never had the chance to play Knights of the Old Republic, or KOTOR as it's commonly known, then I feel very, very sorry for you because it is one of the greatest gaming experiences of my life, and I just hope that every RPG fan or Star Wars fan out there has a chance to experience this. So without further ado, I will now explain to you why these two games are some of the greatest games ever made, and we are long overdue that KOTOR 3, that sequel that I have been waiting for 16 years. Now let me take you on a journey through time and space, back to the year 2003. To a time when PlayStation 2 and Xbox were battling it out in the console wars, and I was still at university. A company called Bioware, famous for its contributions and pedigree in the RPG world with games such as Baldur's Gate, released a game that nearly derailed my entire university experience. I probably spent more time on KOTOR than I did studying, and I even used my student loan that was supposed to go on noodles and things like that to buy an Xbox and therefore to buy this game. That's how excited I was, and that is a decision that I never ever once regretted. As I've said, Bioware is the company that brought us Baldur's Gate, later brought us Mass Effect and Anthem. But luckily this isn't a video that said what happened to Anthem, this is what happened to KOTOR. Now, I need to mention at this point, when the game was originally in the ideas phase, LucasArts proposed one of two ideas. Either a game that was tied heavily to the Attack of the Clones film, or a game that was set thousands of years before the prequels. And I can only say thank goodness that Bioware took the decision to make the game they made, because they believed that setting it thousands of years before the prequels would give them more creative freedom. And probably also meant they dodged that bullet of putting Jar Jar Binks into the game. Now, I'm not going to go too heavily into the story of this game, because arguably KOTOR has one of the greatest stories I've ever played. If you have been lucky enough to play this game and experience it and still remember it vividly as I do, then you will be all too aware that one of the greatest twists of all time, not only in video games, but in any form of media, exists in KOTOR, and that is exactly why I will not be ruining any story for you, because if you do get the chance to play it, either the original or they do one day remake this game or remaster it, then I don't want to ruin that for you, because I don't want that on my conscience for the rest of my life. Rather than focus on story specifics, what I will tell you is that the character Darth Malak, who is like an evil Dark Lord of the Sith, has basically launched war against the Republic. And you can create a character from one of three classes: Scoundrel, Soldier, or Scout. And your actions and interactions throughout the game earn you light side and dark side points, effectively deciding which side of the Force you're going to exist on. And the things that helped you decide your alignment to the Force could be a simple word, dialogue choice, or even a major plot decision. You also get to visit your favourite locations such as Kashyyyk, Dantooine, Tatooine's in there. And while there's a lot of familiar locations, don't go expecting to see any of those familiar characters like Luke, Han, or Leia, because this is 4,000 years before they existed, or even 4,000 years before the prequels. And I have to say at this point, back in 2003, before I played this game, I was skeptical that I could ever enjoy a game in the Star Wars universe. Now, I know I sound a bit ignorant, but I loved the Star Wars films so much that I believed that you couldn't experience a good Star Wars game without those familiar characters. And this game taught me that the Star Wars universe was bigger than the Skywalkers. And you may judge me on that, but this is a lesson that seemingly Disney took a long time to learn as well. The combat in this game was fundamentally turn-based, and for much of the game you could have up to 2 companions in your party. Now, while the game mechanics were fundamentally brilliant, it is actually the story and the characters that you meet that make this game one of the most complete experiences. Characters like Bastila Shan, Karth Onasi, Mission Val, Zalbar, and if you've played the game, you'll understand this word, Revan. Now, I'm not usually a massive fan of that wonderful phrase, your choices matter, because surely I always argue that the only choice that ever matters in a video game is your purchase of it. And after that, it's just programmed. However, this was one of those games that truly did feel like your choices mattered, because at the end, what you had done along the way truly affected the outcome. I'm not going to say any more than that, because if you have played it, you know what I'm talking about. So to summarize, you have a great game with great mechanics, developed by a company with a pedigree in RPGs, along with a fantastic universe pre-made in the form of Star Wars, but managed to create its own lore and was brilliant at world building, character design, dialogue, and story. And I loved this game, and I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video, you did too. Taking a trip down memory lane, watching this video, and the Metacritic score agrees with us. At the time of making this video, the score, the meta score, is a whopping 93, and the user score is 9.0. And when a game does really, really well, a sequel is spawned. But something that not a lot of people realise is that Bioware didn't make Knights of the Old Republic 2. Because LucasArts set such a tight time limit for a sequel to be turned round, Bioware didn't want to rush it out and instead indicated and recommended another developer with an RPG pedigree in the form of Obsidian Entertainment. And this is a company that has since brought us games like Fallout New Vegas and The Outer Worlds. Not to mention Pillars of Eternity. Now, this is quite an unusual step that one developer will recommend another one. But anyway, apparently the development for the sequel, Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, began in October 2003, and plans, it quite clearly seems that plans were well underway for the sequel before the finalization of the first game. Now, for me, of the two games, the sequel wasn't quite as good as the first one, and I'd argue that the only area it really surpassed the first one in was the dialogue. I think genuinely the dialogue and the script writing was slightly better in The Sith Lords. Now, upon playing the sequel, you can tell that the games were developed quite closely, that the two developers worked quite closely together, because a number of the characters from the first game do cross over into that second game, including one of my favourite characters, HK-47, who was a really cool assassin droid. Now, this game was built on the same Odyssey engine. It had that familiar third-person feature and also a kind of pausable real-time combat. And this time you took control of an exiled Jedi who had ties to an event in the first game. No spoilers. And once again, as within the first game, you had that choice, or the ability to align with the light or the dark side, and that came from dialogue options and also story points. And as I've mentioned, not everybody realises that these two games were developed by two different developers, and I think that's testament to the fact that these games play and feel very, very similar. Even down to the fact that the combat is pretty much the same. Alright, there's a few extra kind of lightsaber moves in that sequel, but effectively it didn't feel overly different, and that's not a criticism, that's a very good thing, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. One of the standout features of this game was the bad guys. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Malak, but this time you had three Dark Lords. You had Darth Nihilus, you had Darth Traya, and you also had this kind of undead zombie Dark Lord called Darth Sion. Now, if I go any further into this game's story, I'm going to ruin things for you, and that's not my intention today. So what I'm going to tell you is that I loved KOTOR 2, but not as much as KOTOR 1, and the Metascore agrees with me. At the time of making this video, the Metascore is 85 and the user score is 8.5. So still really high scores, but sadly not as good as that original game. However, the sales did really, really well once more. And I often find myself saying on these kind of videos, like, when there's a lot of sales, there comes a sequel. But in this case, it never happened. So what happened to KOTOR 3? Why have we not seen it as of yet? Well, I think this one comes down to a number of factors. Now, rumours have circulated for many, many years that KOTOR 3 has been in development, or KOTOR 3 ideas have been pitched, but it's never really got off the design or ideas phase, sadly. Now, there's a lot of rumours as to why this game never came to fruition, and that includes things like LucasArts didn't want to invest that much money into the project, and that Bioware didn't have any ideas at the time, but I think probably the most accurate rumour that I've heard is that at that time, Bioware was focusing on their next game, Well, Jade Empire was their next game, but the one after was Mass Effect. And I believe that they were making Mass Effect with an idea to later down the line come back to that KOTOR franchise and make KOTOR 3. However, something intervened. And that was that in 2007, they were bought out by Electronic Arts. Now, EA seems to have a philosophy of making multiplayer games and not really focusing on those kind of single-player experiences. You can see that once again. I'm going to mention Anthem, that was a game that really did have that pedigree of Bioware, but included so many features of an EA-focused game. That's another video for another day. But it's safe to say most of EA's games and most of EA's Star Wars games have been much more multiplayer-focused. And even when Bioware did return to the world of the Old Republic, they brought us an MMORPG. And I didn't really get into this because I wanted that single player experience. I wanted KOTOR 3. I didn't want an MMORPG. And yes, apparently some of the characters turned up again and it was really good. But in 2011, that is the last kind of entry that we get into the world of the Old Republic. And for me, it's not something that I really include in this video or want to include in this video because I feel that KOTOR 1, KOTOR 2 were completely different animals to this MMORPG. However, for me, it always does feel that this game was much more in line with EA's focus at the time. So I think realistically, since 2007, the reason that we have not seen another KOTOR game from Bioware is quite simply because EA didn't want to fund it. They didn't want to put the money in and they didn't see the value of it. And that brings us up to the modern day where every kind of few months you get a video on the internet or an article in a magazine saying, now is the perfect time for KOTOR, or when are we going to see KOTOR 3? And I suppose this is the time when I focus on it and say, could we ever see KOTOR 3 or a KOTOR remaster? And do you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, I think we could. I think we will. Because EA, as much as people say they're a bit averse to kind of making a single-player game, they're not kind of opposed to making money, and that's what KOTOR 3 would do. Also, the fact that EA owns Bioware and has the rights to make Star Wars games from Disney means that they are in the perfect position to make KOTOR 3. In fact, Bioware is probably the only company that could make KOTOR 3 as of now. One thing that does give me hope that we could one day see KOTOR 3, and it could be soon, is the fact that EA, well, Capital Games, which is part of that EA machine, has produced a game called Galaxy of Heroes, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. It's a free game. Wait a minute, I'll explain that free thing in a minute. It's a free game, it's an app game that goes on your phone, and it's on the Apple Store and the Android Store, and you can download it for free. Now, back in the day, that game was a lot better than it is now, because now it seems to be a pay-to-win strategy all the time, that you've got to wail on the most expensive characters just to kind of be able to compete. But why am I mentioning this game? It's because they included the KOTOR characters. Characters like Revan, characters like Malak, characters like Traya, characters like Sion, characters like Bastila Shan. They appeared in this game. So the fact that EA has consciously included the KOTOR characters into another game that it's developing via another developer in the form of Capital Games means that EA is well aware that KOTOR not only exists, but is popular with fans. And I saw that moment that they introduced those characters into the franchise, into that game, as a testing of the water, that they were seeing the fan response, because the fans were going wild at the idea of getting Revan. So now I think, yes, I think EA is well aware that KOTOR 3 could make them a lot of money. So personally, I believe that KOTOR 3 or KOTOR remaster could be happening in the next couple of years, and I can tell you at this point that I will be disappearing for a very long time to play this game, and I will be reviewing it and telling you how wonderful my life is. But that brings us to the end of this epic journey, this Star Wars of a journey. So tell me in the comments below, which would you sooner see? A KOTOR remake, a KOTOR remaster, or even a KOTOR 3? And which one was your favourite? Was it KOTOR 1 or was it KOTOR 2? Let me know in the comments below. Let's have a conversation. But for now, this is Roy McCoy, out!